There's a thin line between making someone feel safe and not letting them get too close to where they forget where they end and where you start.
People feel safe with you because they know that you have a story. You had to make your own fucking clothes and you figured it out.
For our next session, bring a picture of your 4-year-old self and then look at that kid. And then I want you to tell me if you would inflict the same torture upon that child that you do to yourself. There's plenty of times that I cried in my car when someone relapsed or a client I had been working with passed away. But I had to learn that I can't save them. So when they're doing well, it's not because of me, it's because of them.
Welcome back to the Seano Show. I'm your host, Seano McFarland. Today's guest is transforming capital T lives in mental health and addiction recovery. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in trauma, addiction, helping families heal with a multicultural background, over a decade of experience. She also teaches future therapists at Woodbury University. It's my pleasure to welcome my colleague, Mercedes Coffman, to the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
It's a real blessing to have you here.
And I can't wait to get into some great conversation.
We're going to get into it. First off, tell folks where you're from. And how did you end up, probably we'll start at CryHelp. Start there.
So I was born in South America, in Suriname, South America, which is a very small country right above Brazil. We speak Dutch, which I think a lot of people assume that I'd speak Spanish, but I speak Dutch. I moved here with my mother when I was 15. It was just her and I. My father is still there. We still have great contact with him as well. And then my two loves were psychology and the mind. So psychology, the mind, and fashion. I love fashion too. So I kind of merged the two in undergrad, doing both fashion and psychology. But I really fell in love with the psychology track. So I continued that and I went into grad school at Pepperdine, where I completed clinical psychology as master's in marriage and family therapy. And so then my internship started at CryHelp, which is where I fell in love with working and treating people with addiction.
Right. Tell people what CryHelp is and what an incredible learning ground for you. What was,
Yes. So I had no intentions of working in the field of addiction. However, there were no other, to be completely transparent, there were no other internships available at the time once I graduated grad school, and CryHelp was the only one that was available. Now, CryHelp, for those of you who don't know, is a phenomenal nonprofit organization that works to help addicts and alcoholics recover. It's an inpatient and outpatient program. And the moment I stepped foot in that place, I had the intention of only being there for one semester. Ended up being 5 years because I fell in love with the people. And I had no experience working with addicts and alcoholics. I am not necessarily an addict and alcoholic myself, but just the humanity, the vulnerability, the transparency in the staff there, because 99% of the staff at CryHelp were in recovery as well. And I just felt at home and comfortable, and seeing the pain and trauma of the clients at CryHelp made me realize that I want to specialize in the expertise of working with addicts and alcoholics. So that was where my love started for treating and helping people.
What I love about you in a salon, we got to talk about your mad design aesthetic, because you make clothes, right?
Yes.
Can we just talk about that just for a second? Then we'll get into more here.
Yes.
It's incredible what you do. You're very humble, but tell the folks about some of your magic, will you?
I am a creative at heart. I am a very lively person. I think I have a very lively inner child, and I try to keep her alive at all costs. I've always been creative and drawing and painting, and fashion has always been something that I've been so infatuated with. It's also a great way of emotional expression. So for me, learning how to make clothes myself, especially at a young age, coming here as an immigrant, not being able to afford some high-end and designer clothing, but just staring at these windows of these great, beautiful dresses and outfits and saying, I want to learn how to make it. And so I asked the guy in the mall one time if he could teach me how to sew.
How old were you then?
I would say 16, 17. And he said, you could intern for me making clothes. I was getting paid, I think, 50 cents a shirt to sew his shirts for him. But I didn't care because I loved that I got to learn. And I think I've always been so open-minded to learn and be a student of everything and anything. And he taught me how to sew. I didn't go to school for fashion. I learned from him, and I just started making my own clothes, and I loved it ever since. I made my own wedding dress. I've made dresses. It became a business when I didn't have my legal papers yet, coming as an immigrant. And it served a great purpose, and it still is very near and dear to my heart.
One of the reasons why I think you're so successful with clients, particularly, it's a rare exception where somebody's not an addict who can be so successful with addicts, is I think your compassion and that people feel safe with you because they know that you have a story. Like you didn't just, end up at Pepperdine. Like you had to make your own fucking clothes and you figured it out. Can you talk to me about that?
I agree. I think that my clients could connect with the saying of suffering breeds compassion.
Oof.
I think that is so powerful because I am extremely compassionate to people who are suffering. And that's not because I had the most traumatic life per se, but because when I first moved here, I did have to figure things out as an immigrant on my own. I didn't get scholarships and grants or financial aid. My mother worked really hard and multiple jobs to help my schooling, and I never took any of it for granted. And I worked day and night, studied day and night. And I just think that I have such a weak spot in my heart for the underdog. I always have been, because I think I was the underdog. I never was, the popular girl. So I've always kind of been the more introverted, quiet underdog. And because of that, I connect very deeply to wounded people. And again, I also, because I was born in a family of workaholics, I think I knew what it felt like not really having people who had time to listen, which is why I became the therapist who listens to others who need to be heard. So
that's kind of a rough group down there sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they were lighting you up. I'm sure they're like, damn, sister, how did you work with all that? What was your secret sauce there? And disarming them and
Well, yeah, in CryHelp in particular, I think that for me, it was, of course, I had to learn how to navigate working with, some people had just been incarcerated, came out of prison. And I had to learn boundaries, first and foremost. Being a woman, I had to learn boundaries that, it's a very intimate field, and you get to have intimate conversations with people. And I think there's a thin line between making someone feel safe and not letting them get too close to where they forget where they end and where you start. And so I had to learn how to set boundaries, but also how to really pour my heart into the recovery process. There's plenty of times that I cried in my car when someone relapsed or a client I had been working with passed away and overdosed. But I had to learn that, I can't save them. So when they're doing well, it's not because of me, it's because of them. And if they're not doing well, it's also not because of me, it's because of them. And so I learned how to empower people and not try to just save and fix them.
I love that. I love that. Well, you worked with thousands of individuals there.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the keys to success of people that got long-term recovery? Looking at kind of your case load there.
I think that if I were to look at the cases that really ended up being success stories, or clients that till this day will still come into my classes and speak about their recovery, I would say first and foremost, the longer you stay in treatment, the higher your chances of success, I've noticed.
Right on.
Because just like a person's addiction didn't grow overnight, and their habits, their recovery is not going to just take 7 days or 14 days. Now, I understand that not everybody has insurance or the right resources to stay longer. But the beauty of the recovery field is that there's always someone willing to take people under their wing, AA meetings, NA meetings. And that's what I love about this field. It's not like regular insurance companies where you need to always have money in order to recover. This field is filled with people who are willing to help, even if you don't have a dime. You know this. You've
Yeah,
helped
sure.
plenty of people. So I think that I would say the longer the better. I also would say having a sense of purpose. Another thing I've noticed is recognizing why they were using to begin with. I think that's where therapy is effective, is getting an addict or an alcoholic to know, why did you start using? And not to stay there, but to heal from it so that we could find better coping mechanisms instead of the destructive ones.
Right on. Oh, beautiful. Okay. I have a lot of clients that have the term bad pickers. Bad pickers. See, this is where I think you really thrive. I think this is where, honestly, I think you're one of the best in the country on your opinions and expertise on this. Let's talk about chasing emotionally unavailable people. Can we just go there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I often talk about this in my field, and it seems to have become a sort of expertise because I'm faced with so many men and women who deal with this, not just in addiction, but the idea of having a bad picker, because a lot of us had unavailable parents. And chasing an emotionally unavailable person usually always stems back to an emotionally unavailable parent, whether one or both, because you'll only chase what feels familiar. And if you didn't have that childhood experience or early essential year experience, something in you will say, this hurts too much. My self-worth is too high to tolerate this. And so a lot of people who chase emotionally unavailable people were once wounded children who did not have an emotionally available parent. And so it's familiar to chase that. And they tend to people please and hope that this person will one day validate their worth and value the way that their parents should have.
Right on. Okay. So what are some of the flags you warn your folks to be like, listen, you got to look out for this? What are some of the key Mercedes flags that,
Emotionally unavailable people?
Yeah.
I would say one of the flags for emotionally unavailable people is people who don't feel comfortable talking about their emotions, who cannot even know what they're feeling. There's a lot of people who are not comfortable with their vulnerability. So even on the first date, asking them, hey, what are your fears? A simple question like that will be very tough for an emotionally unavailable person to answer because it requires a level of vulnerability to talk about your fears. I think another one is, how do you deal with conflict? Right? Emotionally unavailable people tend to avoid conflict. They do not like dealing with it. They either will retreat, they will remove themselves, distance themselves, avoid it, or use substances. And so I think emotional availability is the ability to sit with your emotions, know what you're feeling, and also be able to sit with your partner's emotions and not need to escape theirs or your own emotions.
Oh, right on. Beautiful. Okay. Could you please explain to the audience what love bombing is?
Yes, that's another big one in our field. Love bombing is anytime a person is extremely excessive with their compliments or their gestures of love and care or desire for you in a very short period of time. So you meet someone on the first date, by the second date, they're already professing that they might be falling in love with you. Or you're the most beautiful woman they've ever seen, or the most handsome man they've ever seen, and they want to have children with you and start a family with you, all within less than 2 months. And so this love bombing is highly addicting. I mean, talk about addiction and recovery. And so a lot of wounded people fall for love bombing very easily. I mean, it feels good. And we have to really be honest with ourselves that love bombing, although it has a negative connotation, a lot of us are wounded and long for that. We desire for someone to come with that intensity that we never felt our whole lives. And so when someone comes and injects us with all this adoration and admiration, we immediately sniff it up like a line of Coke and go, wow, this feels so good. And that's where the addiction and codependency starts. And it's very, very difficult for people to heal from love bombing once they get hooked on it.
Why it's such an important thing to learn how to have tools to deal with this, because if you're prey to love bombing, when the love bombing stops, that's when people go out,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Because if you think about it, love bombing increases our dopamine levels. Dopamine is in every drug you could imagine. So love bombing is the equivalent of the methamphetamines, the cocaine, stimulants, coffee, anything in intensity. And so imagine a person's brain getting hooked on that high level of dopamine, and then now all of a sudden it is, bam, overnight removed. The drop in dopamine will lead to immediate depressive symptomology. And so that's what we need to not take for granted, or we need to be more serious about, is looking at a person who has gotten used to love bombing needs the same recovery and the patience of us or from us that a person who was a cocaine addict would. Because the dopamine is just as intense and the recovery will probably be just as difficult for that person.
So, Mercedes, what do you say to a client who's like a weekend of dating this person and they're getting love bombed? They say, how do I handle this? What's your counsel to them?
I would say if a person is too sure of you in a very short amount of time, pump the brakes. You don't necessarily have to walk away from this person, but verbalize that you want to take it slowly. I always tell people, get to know a potential dating partner in different environments, around their friends, around their family. How are they at their job? If you have access to those environments, see them in those environments before, because anything could be performative when it's just the two of you and when there's intimacy. But when you expand a person's circle and you really get to see them in their actual environments, that's when you really start seeing the inconsistencies of what they show you versus how they actually are. So I would say if it feels too good too quickly, slow down, because it most likely is love bombing and it's based on addictive patterns and not so much on actual compatibility.
I love the counsel about seeing them in other environments. It's so good because what happens, I believe, when you get somebody to say pump the brakes, they're either going to apologize, go, my God, you're right, or they're going to turn on you.
Yes.
There's no in between, right?
Yes.
And you really kind of figure out what their nature is.
Yes. That's also another way to see if someone is love bombing you. If they get offended by you saying pump the brakes.
You got a love bomber.
You might be dealing with a love bomber or a narcissist.
Yeah.
And so you really kind of want to assert yourself and set those boundaries early on to see how this person deals with boundaries. That's a way to detect and assess if someone is healthy and has been doing their healing work, or if someone is still in a wounded narcissistic pattern. And if that's the case, you probably should pack up and run.
Hard. Run hard. Okay, let me ask you this. This is something else that I love, reading about and listening to you talk about. Why is abandonment such a powerful wound?
Oh, because abandonment, it blinds us to so many things. I think that an abandonment wound is probably one of the most harmful wounds that a person could experience, because it could either lead to very intense codependency, where people will stay because they're so deadly afraid of ever being left alone again. It will make them tolerate abuse, much more likely to do so, even at the expense of life-threatening or even death. And so abandonment wounds almost always lead to the person who was once abandoned to abandon themselves. Right? So when you deal with someone who has been abandoned in childhood or somewhere where it was very critical for them not to be abandoned, you really have to do the healing work prior to them getting into relationships, because by default, they already will prioritize relationships with others or prioritize other people over themselves. Because I have never worked with someone who has an abandonment wound who has not abandoned themselves.
Amen. So talk about some of the techniques you help people with to handle these wounds and get healthier around them.
Yes. So one of the things I do to get people to reconnect to themselves is I work with them on reconnecting to their inner child. A lot of people, especially once we get in adulthood, we have less compassion for ourselves. We say, oh, I'll sleep later. I'll get up earlier. Oh, I could deal with the pain, or the heartbreak's not that bad. We kind of minimize problems in adulthood and we feel as though we should be able to handle it. However, when I tell people, for our next session, bring a picture of your 4-year-old self, preferably by himself or herself, and then look at that kid. And then I want you to tell me if you would inflict the same torture upon that child that you do to yourself. And that's when the walls come down and the person goes, oh my God, I have been very abusive to myself. I wouldn't do that to this kid. I wouldn't call this kid fat or ugly. I wouldn't put them in the care of an abuser or a toxic person. And so I have them every morning look at that picture. I tell them to put them on their phone screen or their lock screen. And every morning I have them look at that kid and say, you're safe now. I'm going to protect you. And I'm not going to put you in harm's way. And that's how reconnection starts, because now they could relate it to something that looks so innocent and pure, and they all of a sudden develop compassion for self. But you have to first put it in the form of a child, and then they eventually start having that compassion for themselves as an adult as well.
Beautiful. You work, with a lot of people with a lot of sexual trauma, a lot of PTSD, right? How do you create like a safe space for them? And what is somebody newly in recovery that having these issues kind of walk through early stages of recovery for that?
I would say the first thing is to always be a judge-free zone, making a person feel like there's nothing you could tell me that will shock me. There's nothing you could tell me that will make me look at you differently. There's nothing you could tell me that I probably haven't heard before. And we'll go through this together at your speed, at your timing, whenever you're ready to. And I think that the more authentic a therapist is or a healer is in a session, the safer the zone becomes for the patient or the client. And so I think whether it's PTSD or sexual trauma or abandonment wounds, I think I always just try to connect with the person first. What are you into? I like that outfit. And I find genuine things to connect with them on. Once they start laughing and we just connect, I said, look, I know you're probably nervous, because it is a very nerve-wracking process once you first start therapy or healing or recovery. But I just want you to see this as a conversation with a person. And before you know it, the ice breaks and the person is ready to kind of dive deeper.
And, like the question I asked you with people in recovery around addiction, people recovering from sexual trauma, from PTSD, what are some of the keys to success that you've seen? What are some of the secret sauce that they've been doing, do you see?
I think consistency in their healing. I think that people who have, just like in recovery, they have a program. I think having a routine that keeps a person grounded in their healing is essential to sustaining that healing and that recovery. So I think the moment a person unplugs from that, just like, in recovery, we always say the addict could still come out depending on whether your program is strong or your support. So I think in anybody that I've worked with, what I've noticed some of the key to success is that staying surrounded by the right support and staying plugged in the right program, whatever that program may be for that person.
Right on. Okay. So what do you say to the husband or the partner or the moms or the kids? And they call you up all the time and say, Mercedes, he won't get sober. He can't get sober. Or he relapsed again. What's your counsel to them?
My counsel to them is, I'll work with the client, but you need to work on yourself.
Oof. Right.
Because loved ones of addicts and alcoholics become addicted to the addict or the alcoholic. And so they have to work on their own recovery as well. They have to find a way to connect to their lives as well, because most of the partners, children, or parents of addicts and alcoholics I've worked with have become so obsessed about the addict or the alcoholic that they completely abandoned and neglected themselves. And so my advice to them is always let the professionals work with the addict and alcoholic, and let's have faith that they're doing the right thing. But in the meantime, it's essential for you to work on yourself, to heal yourself, and to recover from being so obsessed and addicted to this other person.
A lot of times they don't like to hear that. Well, you don't understand. The problem is, no, right? Right? They don't. It's a
Absolutely.
they don't want to
wanna-
hear that.
No. And that's why I like working with addicts and alcoholics, because by the time they come to treatment, they know they have a problem. The loved ones of the addicts and the alcoholics have never thought that they're part of a problem.
Right,
So for them, there was always an identified patient. So when I then say, hey, look, you have issues you have to work on as well, it is oftentimes shocking. It's like, wait, no, but don't you know what he's been doing or what she's been doing? And it's like, no, I know that. And he knows that too. But you have to look at what you've been doing and what addictive cycle you are in so that you could recover from it, so that when he or she comes home, you're not wrapped up in this codependent pattern that's going to make him go use again.
Right on. Beautiful. Why do people stay in dysfunctional relationships?
So many great loaded questions today.
I know.
Well, there's several different reasons. I think familiarity, I've noticed, is the most common one. People stay in relationships because, one, it's familiar to their upbringing or the people they were around at an early age. So if it's chaos that you were raised around, or dysfunction or abandonment, you're much more comfortable and your nervous system is more familiar with that. So you'll tolerate it more. I think, secondly, people who have low self-worth. We only tolerate people who reflect the way that we perceive ourselves. So if I consider myself of high value and worth, I will not tolerate a person who does not respect and honor that same perspective that I have about myself. And so the two things I always work on is healing from childhood wounds and increasing a person's self-worth and value.
How does a person get better self-worth?
Great question. The first thing is to spend more time by yourself. When you spend time with yourself, for example, I have a lot of fun different ways that I have clients do that. One of them is I have them explore with fashion. I love fashion, so I find a way to bring it back into my session. I have them try on different clothes,
That's cool.
different things that they're not so limited to one particular role or presentation. I have them break out of the limitations of emotional expression through fashion, through painting, through art. And then I also have them go on dates. And they're oftentimes deadly afraid and embarrassed to do that. But I say, take yourself out on a date. Go sit in that restaurant by yourself. Don't worry about who thinks you'll get stood up. Just sit there and sit through the discomfort and just be with yourself. Most people are so terrified by being with themselves, which is where I think a lot of pain keeps getting passed down from generation to generation.
I love that. Yeah, ultimately it's about self-love, correct? Right?
Yes.
You got to have the self-love, right?
Yes. That's where it all comes from.
You and I have talked about this the last 2 or 3 years. The suicide rates have just been skyrocketing. Younger people, check it out. What are you seeing out there? What's happening out there? Why are people so scared and overwhelmed right now? Why are so many young people checking out, in your opinion?
I think because the world is unfortunately increasingly becoming more disconnected. Social media is connecting us more, but personal relationships are becoming more and more disconnected. And so the parents of these younger people are more disconnected. The whole thing of a lot of us were raised by a tribe, by aunts and uncles, and that is increasingly getting smaller. Then you throw social media in the mix. Then you throw laptops and iPads and all these different things in the mix. And so the parents, as well as the kids, all are islands. It's a bunch of islands in one home now. And so now these children become teens and young adults who feel so terribly alone. And so suicide oftentimes is just people feeling as though the pain of being alone is too much to handle and bear. They do not feel connected to themselves, and they do not feel connected to anybody else. And so, unfortunately, that's the issue with this day and age.
Well, that's great. Yeah. Fentanyl doesn't help either.
No, absolutely not. Of course, that's just a way that they check out. That's just a way of dealing with the loneliness. It's a means to an end. It's how do I cope with feeling so disconnected? What could make me feel some sort of connection to something? Feel some kind of emotion. And so the drug is just kind of almost like the last resort, more so than the problem. The problem is we have a bunch of disconnected people. That's what we need to solve. The drug is actually their best friend. And although it's detrimental and oftentimes deadly, to that person, it's a glimmer of feeling good.
So I've found out it's great satisfaction that, we're developing more younger listeners on the show, like teenagers, and
That's
really
great.
warms my heart.
That's great.
And it's interesting who they relate to, whatever. But these issues that you just spoke about so beautifully, what can you say to that person right now who's got the darkness is on you right now? They're debating, should I even be on this planet anymore? What is your counsel to that person? What is the first step for somebody who's really every day struggling whether or not they want to be around?
I would say you're here for a reason. That's the first thing. I think that, I've taught a lot about the journey of conception. I teach a lot in my classes on how we all got here and how many things could have went wrong for us not to be here during conception. And the fact that you are here, the fact that you made it through the entire intricate process, that you out of billions and billions of sperm were the ones who made it, the ones who have a purpose to be here. I would say you may not know what your purpose is yet, but I promise you, if you just hang on a little longer and talk to somebody, there are people out there who care. There are people out there who will connect you to your purpose. Just do not check out prematurely, because there is a reason you're here, and there are other generations who are looking up to you to help them as well. So that's what I would say. I think that every single person on this planet has a purpose.
Right on. Oh, I love that. And just too, as a friendly reminder to the audience, I always tell people, because darkness will tell you not to reach out. It will tell you don't bother people. But all you have to do is text help. That's what I tell people. You don't have to get into it. Just tell somebody you're scared, you need help. It's the most important thing. Let's go in a little bit. I'm going to come around to all the others. Great thing. You're teaching. What's that like for you and teaching, and how long you've been doing that, and kind of your messaging there? And wow.
I love teaching. I do. I feel like it's similar like therapy. I love connecting with people on a more intimate level, and having intellectual conversations. And my undergrad students are brilliant young minds. I teach a intro to the psychology of addictions class. I usually teach communication, interpersonal communication, how to listen better, how to connect better. And then I also teach a lot of communication courses. I've taken a break because my private practice has gotten much bigger, but I've been teaching since 2013. So I definitely is something at Woodbury University. What I love about that school is it's small classes. So my classes would range from 20 to 25 the most. The capacity for classes are about 25. So each student gets to really intimately connect with the professors, and the professors get to really learn from the students, and the students from the professors. So it's not like, for example, my husband's from Penn State. Those classes are massive. I like smaller, more intimate settings and really reach these people and impact them so that they could impact other generations and people around them as well.
Beautiful.
So I love it.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. Let me ask you this. I've talked to you many times. You're always on a high frequency. You're always got that beautiful smile. There's always a beautiful light. And I know you're busy, and I know you're dealing with life and death every day. How do you maintain this level of serenity, this level of consciousness, this level of awareness? Can you what's going on over there?
I think for me, I have a great relationship with my higher power. I think that for me, that consists of a more spiritual grounding. I love nature. You've been to my place. Very much into having peaceful surroundings around me. I know that for me, balance is very important. Dealing in the field that we're in, where it could get very heavy, I prioritize my rest. I prioritize affection, hugs with my husband, with my dogs. I connect with nature. I have intimate relationships with the squirrels, and the squirrels, the birds. I think that that's what really keeps me grounded, because it puts things in perspective. It allows me to recognize that even though I could make a great impact in a session, I'm also just one of Earth's many inhabitants, sharing this with my animal friends. And so I think that really, for me personally, is a very meditative practice that I do every single day.
I've never been to Bali, but being at your house, I feel like I visited Bali. I mean, what you created there is really quite something. Do you mind telling the folks like kind of what your magical little, I mean, it's really kind of a special place out there.
I love it. I think we got so blessed in finding our place. It's surrounded by trees. So we have about, I think, 28 palm trees. We have about 24 fruit trees. So there's papaya, there's lemons, of course, oranges, peaches, nectars, there's berries. We're starting to do berries. We got apples this month. We had mangoes. And so for me, I think just the curiosity that I get when I go outside and the wonder, like I said, my inner child just feels so alive. Coming from South America, I was raised around nature and fruits and vegetables. And so for me, it is far more than just a pretty place and a relaxing place. It is medicine for me. And it's so healing.
Yeah, God has spoken there. Truth is spoken there. It's like you kind of see like a Mary Poppins thing going on there. Like, oh, here's a squirrel. Come on. And the squirrels come up to you. It's just like a trip.
Yes, I love it. I'm the Snow White in my neighborhood. I'm brown white. I am.
Well, okay. That's good. That's good. Okay. What's on your mind right now? What would you like to talk about? What issues you think are important that we're looking at in the world right now that you're seeing more and more, that you want to be discussed more things in your practice, more, what's coming to mind?
I think divisiveness is a big one. I think, going back to that isolation and people being disconnected, I'm sure you see it. You work with large groups of people. You travel all over. I think that we have a don't talk about things that may rock the boat conversations. And although we should be respectful of different perspectives, I also think that when we get too far into not talking about things, that's another reason why we're not connecting with people. Because I remember a time where people would talk about their different stances on things, and nobody would feel as though the relationship was going to end. And I think now everybody kind of just has to deal with things on their own, which is kind of why I think mental health issues are on the rise still, So, I mean, do you feel like divisiveness is a big thing now?
It's a huge thing. People are too aggressive or too scared. Not a lot of in between.
No.
And just once again, in the addiction field, it's just, you have to be, let's talk about triggers. Like why do people go back out and relapse? Why do they go? Yeah.
I think that a lot of people go back. I always say it this way. I say that, and Tony Robbins talks about the 6 basic human needs. And I love those 6 basic human needs because I apply them to the couples I work with and the people in recovery. One of them that I consider to be a trigger that will make a person relapse is when they no longer feel significant in recovery and they feel more significant while using or while on the street. So, for example, an addict who has been on the street and was the connect and knew how to mix the drugs and, everybody considered him important in the drug circle, but now comes home in recovery and his wife has a system. Nobody at the house needs him. he feels very insignificant. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't contribute. Guess what? Significance is one of the most important human needs that will determine where a person remains. And if they do not feel significant in a particular environment, they will stray. It happens with infidelity.
Yeah.
If a wife or a husband does not feel significant in their household, they will seek it elsewhere. And it's the same in recovery.
Once again, going back to your theme of you got to have a sense of purpose.
Yes.
You got to have a sense of purpose. It's so important. Okay, let's talk about this then. Why is finding a higher power in recovery so important?
That's another great one. I think it's about surrendering. I think a lot of people start using to regain a sense of control and power, whether it is that they've experienced extreme trauma or rape or sexual assault or abuse. And for a lot of clients I've worked with, the drugs was their way to feel a sense of control again. And so in recovery, I think it's important to learn how to surrender of trying to control. And the best way to do that is to connect with a higher power, something greater than yourself, and not to keep resorting to your own thoughts and feelings to find solutions for problems that are not yours to solve.
So when a client comes in your office and says, I don't know what to believe in. I don't know, where do I start, Mercedes? Like, fuck, how do I find this higher power person?
I typically, and everybody's approach is different. For me, my approach is to just have a conversation with them about what they enjoy. Where do you feel most at peace? Is it the beach? Is it around trees? Is it around birds? Is it in a church? Make that your higher power. Make something that makes you feel like you are calm and your body is surrendering to that environment. Make that your higher power. And then we'll worry about the rest later, because a higher power is not about what I think it is or you think it is. It's about what feels like a higher power to a particular person. And that is their choice.
Beautiful. Yo, I love that. I know you love Tony.
I do.
Know, right?
I do.
How does Tony Robbins resonate with you? I'm curious.
I love Tony Robbins. I've been a huge supporter of all his teachings. I've shown him in many of my classes to my students. I think that he is such a powerful presence, and I've never met him. I'm still waiting for you to take me there one day. I think that he has such a powerful presence, but such a healing presence. Where he doesn't make you feel like there's a disconnect between you and him. At least from what I've seen, feels like just a humble, powerful, healing presence.
You know, one of the things I love about him, I just went out there to surprise him, and he's always so curious. He always wants to learn, and he's just fascinated. It's actually today's day 5. He's doing Date with Destiny. It's a 6-day thing. He doesn't need to do it for the money. He doesn't need to do it. He's doing it for his love of it, because he knows the get down is helping other people. He gets so excited when somebody breaks through. And I know you do too.
Yes.
I think that's why you're happy and you can enjoy your life and talk to the goddamn squirrels. It's because, right? You love when the light goes on with people. And also, if it doesn't go on, and people die here, it's just the way it is. It's not a reflection of your skill set. Absolutely. And I agree with you. I think what I love about Tony and you and in my work is we don't turn people away because they can't afford help. Right.
And even Tony, he's been doing, I think, the Facebook stuff, especially during COVID. He did a lot of Facebook thing that was for free, with giving so many gems and working with people virtually on how to help them heal, which this person doesn't have to do anything for free. But the fact that we love what we do, which is, I think, precisely why it's a sustainable career for people like us, because it doesn't feel like work. There's plenty of times that I'm like, wait, there's so many people who forgot to pay. Like, wait, money. And, and you have to be in a place where you really love your field in order to not check payment every time.
Yeah. And there's a lot of burnout in our career. And it's really, I think, comes down because people think they're trying to save people. And you and I both know you can't save anybody.
Exactly.
We just can't. I'm just a middleman. I'm just trying to drop some truth and light and some compassion and love on you and help you get past your sad story. But if I'm trying to save you, then I think I know what's better in ego. And then, it gets a little funky and scary.
Absolutely. But I think that unfortunately we can't teach that necessarily. I think that takes time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you've been in this field for a long time. I've been in here for quite some time. And I think it's after trying to save them that we finally go, wait a minute,
Right.
there's just no way it's possible. And then we surrender. We surrender and we go, wait a minute, that's all ego stuff. We can't save or fix anybody. We're just here to help and share what we've got. And you'll take what you could use, and what you don't want, that's fine too.
Yeah. People are going to do what they want to do. They're going to do what they want to do. Let's talk about families healing. It's a big component of your work, helping families heal, Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think that in recovery or in any process, whether it's infidelity or substance abuse, I think the entire family is affected by a particular person's actions, behaviors, or patterns. And so I think for me, the reason I love the marriage and family track is because we don't just work on individuals. We work with partners, with families, with siblings. And so I always say, you need to be able to zoom in and zoom out for healing to really, really have a great ripple effect, which means you work with the individual and then you zoom out and you work with their entire family. Because the truth is that until everybody is willing to change the narrative that has been circling in the family, chances are somebody's going to want to pull the dysfunction back out. And so I think that everybody has to heal in order for families. And not every family is willing to do that. That's a hard fact that we should acknowledge too. Most families are willing to only point the finger at one scapegoat and say he or she is the problem. I'm not the problem. And so, of course, we can't force families to heal, but if a family is willing, the chances of healing to actually stick is much higher in those people than in those who are resistant.
So what do you say to a client, male or female, or they say, I don't know if I can ever forgive them for what they've done?
I said, that's okay. Maybe you're not ready yet.
Right on.
I never force forgiveness. I first meet a person where they're at. And I say, wherever you're at is where you need to be. Because I'm sure we all know that forgiveness could help, but there's a reason that person isn't ready to.
Right.
And I'm here just to find out what the reasons are. And then we'll navigate it together.
I love that. Yeah. Why does that put such a smile on your face when you talk about that?
Because I think it just reiterates the power of surrendering, being fluid with the client instead of trying to do the textbook therapy or the textbook healing of we should all forgive. Although there's a lot of commonalities in human beings, we're all very different. And we need to respect and honor the fact that we're all very different. And so I think kind of taking a more serenity approach as I'm getting wiser, I think makes my job a lot easier and my sessions a lot more effective.
I love that because I think I've been successful. I'm going to make, client says, I can't stop freebase. And I say, cool. I don't go, well, you're going to die.
Yes.
They've heard that all their life. What no one says is, okay.
Right.
Okay goes a long way.
Yep. Because now they have to look at themselves.
Right.
But the more that you're going to take responsibility for them, now they don't have to take responsibility for themselves. If you remove yourself out of the way, now they're left to look at themselves. And I've done it with clients too. And I know it's a risky move. I had a client who kept relapsing. And, I've tried all the traditional approaches first. And then after a while, I did your approach. I was like, look, let's just be honest. You want to keep using.
Right.
You love it. You're not going to stop. This is who you are. This is what you want to keep doing. And she immediately was like, no, I don't love it. And I kind of just went along with, well, then show me.
Right.
Show
Let's
me.
see something different.
Exactly. Because I'm not going to be the responsible person for you. You have just as much of a developed frontal lobe as I have. I need you to start learning how to use it. And if you could use it, then you don't need me. But I'm not going to enable you to keep that cycle of helplessness that I know is not true because you're not helpless.
I think there's a real art when you say to somebody, and it's how you say it. It's always about tone. You know, I'm really kind of getting bored with your fucking sad story. How do you deliver that message? What's your expertise with that?
I love that. I'm typically very assertive with my clients. This is why connection and rapport is so important. I make my clients first feel as though I have their backs and that I want what's best for them. And once it's all about feeling it out, this is where mindfulness comes into play. If I feel as though the relationship is strong enough, then I could say to them, hey, look, I can't want this more for you than you do. But of course, you can't say that to a person you just meet the first or second session. But once the rapport is there, you could absolutely push and challenge the person. And I tell them at the first session, I say, look, I'm the kind of therapist who challenges their clients. I'm assertive. I'm very involved. I'm going to give you 150% of me. But it's going to feel challenging and uncomfortable, which means I call you out. My clients do not think of Mercedes as passive and sweet.
Right. No.
But they love me because I am challenging and I get them to look at themselves.
What I love about you is you're very feminine, but you're also fucking fierce. Have you always had that? Were you just always that way and just like give a look to the brother and he would know like, okay, I'll shut the fuck up.
Yes.
Have you always had that?
Yes. I am an Aries. I'm a fire sign and I am walking and talking fire. You know, I don't burn. I've learned how to harness it, but I am definitely feisty. And I have a leadership mentality and I've always had that. And so I think that I've been blessed with parents who allowed me to be my feisty little self. And so now, you know, it works in the fields I'm in as both a professor and a therapist. You know, I get to lead, but I don't lead with ego. I lead with making a person the best version of themselves.
Why is codependency such a serious affliction?
Codependency is very dangerous. And I think a lot of people minimize how detrimental codependency could be because they think of it as, oh, I'm just dependent on another person. And of course, that is the more simple definition of it. But a codependent person is a person who, again, going back to abandonment of self, who has abandoned themselves, their worth, their power, their stance, their voice. And they have created this correlation that their worth, their emotions, and their well-being is dependent on another person. And so if another person mistreats you, and if that other person doesn't like you one day or doesn't respect you one day, I've seen people go into a full-on depression and self-sabotaging patterns because they're so dependent on the moods of another person. And that is very dangerous. If you're so dependent on another person's wavelengths, you have completely abandoned yourself. And that is just far too much power to give another person.
What are some basic steps of recovery for somebody who's got severe codependency? What are just beginner steps for you that you try to teach your folks?
I get them to explore themselves. Who are you? What do you like? What don't you like? And oftentimes codependent people might not know what they like and who they are. Right? And so I say, well, what don't you like? They're more likely to know what they don't like. So we start with, what don't you like? Okay, based on that list of what you don't like, now we could look at what's the opposite of what you probably would like then. Then we start really looking and building an identity for themselves. Who are you based on these things? Based on your list of what you don't like, we could detect what your standards are, what your boundaries are. We could figure out what kind of compatibility is actual compatibility and not codependency. And so we kind of start building, establishing, and cultivating an identity that they actually could invest in and spend more time with. But it's no different than any addiction. And so in codependent relationships, especially when they're toxic or dysfunctional, distance, just like recovery, is essential. You cannot recover from your codependency if you're still with this person 24/7.
Oh, I
Just
love
like you
that.
cannot recover from your drug addiction if you're still using every day. It doesn't matter how many tools and how many meetings you attend.
Tony also is very, very big about routines. I have a very intense morning routine that I will never go off. What are your routines?
For me, it's quite the opposite. What revigorates me is, sure, I have a very specific health regimen where I do every morning, I start with warm water with lemon, fresh ground ginger root, cayenne pepper, and turmeric. So I make a shot for me, make one for my husband, and then it's a workout. I do a workout routine, whether it's Pilates or I run on the treadmill. It's great for my mood stabilizing. And then for me, I balance routine with liberation. So after I've done the basics of what my body needs, then I free my mind. So then I break structure. I'm like, you know what? I don't want to eat this today. I want to eat this for breakfast. Or you know what? After my sessions, I'm going to go to the mall. I'm not going to do what's expected. I'm going to let my inner child have some fun, right? Because I think that sometimes, we're like those old school scales. When you go a little too much to the left or the right, you get off balance. I'm constantly adjusting between structure, which is the security, and liberation, which Tony talks about as well. And I make sure that I have plenty of fun every single day, and I have enough structure to sustain the fun that I want to have for the rest of my life.
Beautiful, beautiful. A lot of people, I'm sure, ask you, like, how do I get in this field? Like, I want to help people. I want to maybe someday be a psychologist or a counselor. When they ask you, what do you tell them?
I say, go to school for it. I think it's a extremely rewarding field. Do it because you want to do it and you're genuinely curious about psychology or relationships or recovery, whatever the niche field is that you want to get into. But don't do it for the money. The money is great eventually, but your clients need you to do it for the love of the field. I think that's where healing happens. And clients are very in tune with your intentions and why you're helping them. A lot of clients have trust issues. And so if you want to get into this helping field, I would urge you to follow through on it because we always need more people in this field. But do it for the right reasons. Do it because that's where your heart is.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. I'll also add, if you're really serious, go volunteer for a little bit and see if you actually like it.
Yes.
Go volunteer somewhere, some center, something, some treatment center, and see if it actually,
Absolutely. And that's why I'm glad grad schools do internships. You have to do an internship before you graduate because you don't want to get into this field because, again, it could be very harmful. If you're not in it for the right reasons, you could steer a client in a completely different direction, and that could be life and death, So we want to ensure that people are doing it to where they'll consider human life as sacred and they really do the best that they can to help. So that's what I would say. I say volunteer, do internships, and really, really make sure, is this something you naturally do in your friend circle, in your family circle? Are you the one who really is intrigued with the mind and relationships or recovery? Then go for it. Follow your heart and the money eventually will come.
Let's stay with that, following your heart. Why is that so important? You always follow your heart, but not everybody does that. But why is that so important?
Because it's the fastest way to sustain anything you want. I think that if we follow our hearts, we enjoy what we do, and we'll have less regrets and resentments later on in life.
Yeah, that's so important. What's your final message to everybody?
I say we could all heal. Therapy and recovery is not just for the crazy or the addicts or the alcoholics or the sick or the mentally ill. It is aerobics of the mind and the soul. And we all need that. We all need to exercise our bodies. We need to exercise our minds. And so I would say treat yourself. The end of this year, tomorrow, the beginning of next year, treat yourself by healing, by exploring healing practices. It is the most loving thing you could do for yourself, for your children, for your parents, for your husbands, for your wives, for your future families, for your friends. And so I would say, really spoil yourself. Get yourself a great holiday present or a great New Year's resolution by really exploring who you are and what you actually want to do with your life.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for being on the show. And say hi to the squirrels in the morning for me, will you?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Seano.
The Seano Show is a production of iHeart Podcasts, hosted by me, Seano McFarlane, produced by Pod People and 28th Ave. Our lead producer is Keith Cornelek. Our executive producer is Lindsay Hoffman. Marketing lead is Ashley Weaver. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.